Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff Mom Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. It's time for another female first, which means we are once again so lucky to be joined by our good friend, Yves. Hi, Yves.
Hey, y'all. What's up?
We are so excited to see you as always. You've been doing some traveling, haven't you?
I have. Just a little bit. Spreading my wings a little.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gotta spread those wings eventually. I talked to my mom yesterday and she was like, are you still like a hermit in your apartment? And I said, absolutely, yes, I am. Nothing has changed on my end.
Yeah.
But I am feeling it, especially now, like the weather, it's spring, it's nice outside.
Yeah.
And I've been feeling that want to go and spread my wings, as you say.
Yeah. I don't know why I went like 90s or early 2000s pop with the reference of spreading the wings, but
I liked it.
Yeah, it's the same for me. It's the weather that gets me in the mood. I'm like, ready to take the top off on the Jeep. Well, that too, because but
Get it.
Ready to take the top off on the Jeep, to be clear,
Yes.
and get a little bit of sunlight and fresh air on the skin, a little bit of hammock time.
Ooh,
right.
My birthday is coming up. So it's like, it's a lot of things that makes me a little, more rejuvenated around this time of year. So it was good to start this time with a little bit of travel.
Nice.
Yeah, the sun has finally come out. We are now spring forward. So we have a little more daylight, so that feels nice, except at the same time, awful because I want to sleep. But yes, that sun and warmth. I actually was on a rooftop this weekend acting like things were normal. Threw me off, and I realized I don't know how to behave in public.
Yeah.
But, hey, the sun was nice.
Yes. And Yves, I was going to ask, because your birthday is coming up as we record this. Do you have any plans? Anything you're excited about?
Not really, honestly. I mean, I think the travel did kind of wear me out. Like I want to chill at home for a little bit. So I will, probably do a little dancing, but listening to music, being celebratory in those ways. But I don't have any plans to go anywhere, anything. Just the usual. Being at home feels nice, even though I've been at home for a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just being settled.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. I think there's a difference between like being home and then being home and intentionally doing something you want, like relaxing, especially now since a lot of us in this business anyway are working from home all the time. So I think like taking that time intentionally of being, I'm not working, this is my time to relax and be me and do what I want is important. Yeah.
It is.
True. Mm-hmm.
It is. I'm going to do a half-day meditation sit this weekend that Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, I don't know if people are familiar with her, but she does half-day sits sometimes. So it's been a while since I've done one of those. And I'm just like, I really need to get back into my longer meditation practices because typically I keep them pretty short as a matter of convenience because I'm like, I know that this is a thing that, if you have 5 minutes, take the 5 minutes. And I do that a lot. Right. And I've kind of, because, I've just kind of gotten used to that, telling myself, I know I'm in my practice because I'm doing the 5 minutes. And I'm just like, the longer practices have kind of gone by the wayside. So I want to get back into that. So I'm looking forward to that. That's, I think, recentering, like my birthday, the start of a new year, personal year, is a good time to think about recentering and grounding myself again and like what I want in my upcoming personal year. And that's one of those things. So that's not the most flashy thing
I love that.
to do to celebrate your birthday.
It's a lot of discipline. Like to actually do that length of meditation, I'm not gonna lie, it makes me a little anxious thinking about it. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of discipline. Like the most I can do is 10 minutes. And even then I'm like, maybe I can find the 2-minute one. Can I find the 2-minute one? What's the 2-minute one? I just want to
that works too.
Which still feels like,
Yeah, and to be clear, you get up. Usually there's time for walking meditation in between periods of seated meditation.
Right.
Because, I mean, the bones aren't like they used to be. The joints aren't like they used to be.
The bones?
The bones. Yeah, but seriously, you know, it can be a lot to sit for a long time.
True.
So, you know, you can really cater it to what you need for your own body and your own personal practice.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Well, happy early birthday from us here at Smithy. I'm sure all the listeners are sending you birthday wishes. Maybe there's more champagne and cheesecake in our future. But
Maybe so.
Yes. For now, why don't we jump in? Who did you bring for us today, Yves?
So I just want to give a content warning at the top of this episode because there is mention of racial violence. So if that is something that you're sensitive to, please skip this episode or come back to it at a time when you feel like you're more ready to listen to it. So today we're going to be talking about Jovita Idár. And her she was the founder and the first president of the Liga Femenil Mexicanista. So that is her first. And she has a super interesting history. And I think Spanish has just been on the brain because where I've been traveling, there have been Spanish-speaking countries. So maybe that's why. But I also feel like we haven't touched on a lot of... I've been trying to bring people from countries that we haven't touched on before. And I don't think we've talked about Mexican history. And even if we have, it definitely hasn't been a lot. So as you can tell by the title, Liga Femenil Mexicanista, she was of Mexican descent. She was born on September 7th, 1885 in Laredo, Texas. She had 7 siblings, and her parents were Jovita and Nicasio Idár. Her family she did grow up getting an education. So education was a big topic of concern for her later in her life as we get into the things that she was active around. But it was also something that a lot of people of Mexican descent in Texas did not have access to. And when they did, it was education in the many forms that we know. So when we think of our education in the United States, it's specifically when it comes to history and when it comes to people who are of marginalized identities, the history is told from a singular perspective a lot of the times. It's Anglo-centric. It can be propagandistic when it comes to the way that it speaks about wars. So it was then and it is today. It is today still, as we often say, something that people were aware of and conscious of and really against the way that education was posed to children who were in school. But yeah, she did have access to education. She attended the Holding Institute, which was a Methodist school in Laredo, and she earned a teaching certificate from the school in 1903. And after that, she went on to teach at a school in Ojuelos in southern Texas. But she soon left and went to work with her brothers and fathers. It's told that the way that the conditions were in the school and what she cared about and the values that she had drove her to leave the school. Her father, Nicasio, was a newspaper editor and a publisher and an activist. He was also a Laredo city marshal and a justice of the peace. So their family was heavily involved in the community activism spaces and political spaces as well. It's something that they worked on separately and as a family. So it was definitely like a family venture to be engaged and actually active in the things that they cared about, whether that was in the form of communication through newspapers or activism in political circles. Mm-hmm. So the name of the paper that her father was an editor of was La Crónica, which would be like the Chronicle in English. It covered those issues that they cared about and that were important to many Mexican Americans in Texas. A little background on what Mexican Americans were dealing with at the time. They faced discrimination in the 19th century, as there was. The Mexican-American War ended in 1848. And then white Americans continued to move to the West this history of manifest destiny and like kind of quote unquote conquering the lands as white Americans moved westward in the country. There were a lot of conflicts between white Americans and Mexican Americans, and this continued into the 20th century. There were lots of disputes that included violence. White Americans who weren't of Mexican descent were acquiring land off of people in Texas who were of Mexican descent. And segregation and disenfranchisement were a big part of that history as well. They used those tactics to gain power in Texas. And particularly on the Mexico-Texas border, there was violence. So Texas had the most instances of mob violence against Mexican Americans. And there is a huge history of lynchings on Mexican Americans in Texas. As with other lynchings, the purported causes could range anywhere from, like, this person committed murder against an Anglo-American or something super insignificant, like they cheated in a card game. So as we know the history of, well, I don't know, I can't assume that everybody knows the history of lynchings, but a lot of times mob violence, murder, like gruesome murder, and then in the aftermath of that murder, gruesome displays of that murder were meted out against people who were deemed to have done something wrong in their eyes, whether that thing was actually happened or didn't actually happen. So there was a huge history of lynchings against Mexican Americans at the time. And you can learn a lot more about that history at refusingtoforget.org, which has talked about a lot of it. But just know that in the early 1900s, they faced this physical violence as well as voter suppression tactics. And there was this mythologizing of people of Mexican descent in the United States around them being threats and that they needed to be feared because they were going to link up with Black folks and start revolts. A lot of propagandizing around Mexican Americans being dangerous people based on their color, based on their race. So they were treated as lower class, as inferior, as people, as was shown through those lynchings, who many white Americans would prefer dead. But moving on from that history and back to how Jovita Idár's history is related to it, La Crónica, the newspaper that I mentioned earlier that her father edited, was invested in documenting the civil rights issues that their family cared about, that Mexican Americans in Texas faced. So Jovita was exposed to these political, economic, and social issues early on, and all the activism and advocacy that her family was involved with against these injustices. She wrote articles criticizing the conditions of Tejanos, or Texans of Mexican descent, using the pseudonym Estrella so she could keep her image, quote unquote, clean, because she was still a woman writing about these things that she was very impassioned about. So it was helpful for her to write under a pseudonym. Jovita Idár also wanted schools to focus on teaching the children Spanish and English, and she wanted them to teach Mexican and Mexican American history, in addition to the history that they usually taught, which was very Anglocentric. So she also wrote about racism and anti-Mexican discrimination and poverty and a lot of the issues that Mexican Americans were facing in Texas at the time. And beyond the news and essays that were in the newspaper, La Crónica also published literary works like poetry. In September of 1911, the Idár family organized a conference that was called the Congreso Mexicanista in response to the racism and discrimination and violence that people were facing at the time. There were leaders from the US and from Mexico who joined the conference. And just after that Congress, Idár established La Liga Femenil Mexicanista, the League of Mexican Women. Members were mostly of the working class, which was something that was important because a lot of the time, people who were of the working class didn't have as much of a voice in a lot of the political goings on. The Liga focused on providing education for impoverished Mexican American children And it also provided food and clothing to people. They did events to raise funds for their charity work. And she advocated for women's suffrage, and she wrote about it in La Crónica. Idár was also involved in nursing. So she, during the Mexican Revolution in 1913, after the attack on Nuevo Laredo, which is just on the other side of the Mexican-American border, right across from Laredo on the U.S. side, Jovita went to Mexico to help care for the injured there. And later she joined La Cruz Blanca, or the White Cross. And she traveled in northern Mexico, volunteering as a nurse. And a little on the history of La Cruz Blanca. It was a volunteer service that was similar to the Red Cross. It was created to help people who had been hurt in the conflict, but the Red Cross itself didn't help insurgents. So the people who were in the forces who were opposed to the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz, the Red Cross did not help them. So La Cruz Blanca did. A brigade of La Cruz Blanca was founded by Leonor Villegas de Magnon, who was friends with Jovita Idár, and she also wrote for La Crónica. So eventually, Idár went back to Texas. She joined the editorial staff of a newspaper called El Progreso. And when it published a piece criticizing U.S. involvement in the Mexican Revolution, the governor of Texas ordered Texas Rangers to destroy the paper. So Texas Rangers were also a part of committing the violence that was inflicted upon Mexicans and Mexican Americans that I spoke about earlier around the lynchings. But yeah, so they came to destroy the paper. She tried to block them from doing so. And I feel like this is one of those stories that is so good at like mythologizing a person, because it's her being an upstanding being and, you know, standing in the way, like to demand justice in a way, because you can kind of imagine her in the power pose saying, "Do not come here. You will not destroy this free press." Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, it was one of those moments. And she tried to block them from doing so. They left and then came back and it was destroyed. But her brother, Eduardo, like I said, her family was also super involved in activism. One of her brothers was Eduardo. He was invested in the causes that she cared about, including women's rights. She and Eduardo established another newspaper called Evolucion. And in 1917, she married Bartolo Juarez. She and her husband moved to San Antonio in Texas. And according to author Nancy Baker Jones, she was an active member of the Democratic Party. When she was there, she established a kindergarten. She worked as an interpreter for Spanish-speaking patients in a hospital. And she was editor of a publication of the Methodist Church. And so she continued to do a lot of the similar types of work that she was involved in when she was in Laredo. Idár died in San Antonio in June of 1946. And the Federico Idár and Idár family papers are located in the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at the University of Texas at Austin. And it has photos and documents of the family. And yeah, so her history has been acknowledged and celebrated in certain ways in the work that she did in some of the early feminist organizing and for Mexican American people is acknowledged.
Her story is really amazing, and she was involved in so much different things. I was reading and I was like, oh, wow, she did this newspaper thing. Oh, wow, she was a nurse. Oh, wow, she was a teacher. Like, just very, you can tell, cared about people and cared about these issues and wanted to make the most impact and to connect with the most people, and very, very inspiring, all that she did.
I love that when we talk about people who are missing in the conversation of the suffragette movement and the big names that we know. And here is one who is iconically doing something that was beyond, and it seems alone. She was doing it, but I don't know. It's because I'm just learning about her because you're bringing her to us. And I'm like, what? This is in Texas. And yeah, you can't help but like play the fact that this is like the West, like the big bad West area where it does feel like it's a little more free for all. In my head, I've watched way too many Westerns. But in my mind, I'm like, and she was out there really bringing out some big conversations about what it is to have the women's right to vote and the fact that women should be educated. And if a woman is educated, then that means it's going to help everyone overall, and having these like amazing breakthrough ideas that seem so big, like, actually, it doesn't, because again, kind of same conversations I've had before as the pessimist of like, oh, look, we're still here.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But the fact that she was there and standing tall, yes, and in my head, she's also standing tall in front of that door, blocking whomever is trying to get in the way to destroy her work. Like that is like an iconic picture in my head now. I don't want it to be ruined ever. But like that she was doing this, and seemingly while one movement, the same movement was happening so far away, she was doing it for her area and really truly fighting as a voice, as a Mexican American voice who, yes, has relative privilege, but at the same time, she's still a Mexican woman who was not white. So that in itself was a barrier for her, but she was standing strong. Is phenomenal.
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of the histories that she was connected to also are super interesting to dive into, because La Cruz Blanca, an organization that was started by women as well, you know, they have their own histories of the work that they did that was also super important at the time. And just knowing that her family was so established in the work that they did is also just like, it seems like she was linked to so many different kind of circles of people who have fascinating histories as well, which is like, I love that. I love when that happens when we're doing these female first, because it just gives you more room to fall into the rabbit hole, like ones you didn't know about. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool.
I love that too. In this story, there's multiple instances of, oh, that doesn't exist, I'll do it then. Of like women being like, oh, wait, what? Then I'll start it. That's always fun too.
I did get to see this picture of her and her family at the press. And she's the only woman standing aligned. And I'm like, oh my God, like she really, they as a family unit seemed to be a powerhouse. And that's phenomenal in itself, because not too often our stories share the fact that you have that support. And not only that, like having that support and her being a leader. And I don't know if she was seen as a leader then, but the fact that she had so much support. And now today, at least, when we talk about her as the leader at that point in time, but having that background support of whether Eduardo was right there, like, yeah, let's talk about voting rights, but let's talk about women's rights. I'm with you. Let's go, sis. You know, like it seems like such a great story. Maybe, again, I'm idealizing it. I've been watching too many Disney movies in my head, but that's okay. Like it's also very encouraging to know that she did have that support, even talking about the fact that she took care of her sister's children after her sister died. Like all of that support, familial support, seems also very important to her, and why she's doing it was very evident because of the large family she had and who she was supposed to represent and who she wanted better in her life. So it's this feels like a Disney movie maybe.
I think every episode of Female First, Samantha, you have a movie pitch at the end.
I can't help
their
it.
stories are great and they're not wrong.
Is it embellished? Yes. But in my head, I'm like, could it be? Yes.
I love it. I think we could get together, make a whole like series about this.
Yeah.
Maybe a PBS documentary. Come on.
Yeah. Come on. Well, anything else you want to add before we wrap up, Yves?
No, I think that is all I got for today.
All right. Well, thanks as always for bringing these amazing stories to us. Happy early birthday again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Where can the good listeners send their birthday messages?
Send them to @NotApologizing on Instagram, @YvesJeffCo on Twitter. And you can also hear me on many other episodes of Female First right here on Sminty. And that's all.
Yeah.
That's it.
We're coming up on our 50th. I think we'll have to do something else. Another celebration.
Sure? Did we actually count it this time?
No, but I feel I sense it. I sense it in my bones.
The instinct is we're there.
Yes. The instinct is telling me it's time for another celebration.
Okay. I mean, I'm down for that.
All right. Perfect. Well, thanks as always for joining us, Yves. We look forward to doing another one in the coming month. In the meantime, listeners, if you would like to email us, you can. Our email is stephanie@momstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter @momstuffpodcast or on Instagram @stuff I never told you. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.